In most lives, there comes an ordinary morning that becomes, without warning, the beginning of a long, quiet rupture. Nothing visible has changed. The room is the same, the routines are the same, the tasks of the day still make their reasonable demands. But somewhere inside the seer, a definition that had carried weight for years has gone slightly transparent. A goal that had been pursued without question seems, for the length of a single breath, like a piece of stage scenery one has somehow walked behind. Nothing breaks, nothing collapses, but a quiet question rises in the chest, and once it has risen, it does not leave. Is this all? It does not arrive as a crisis. It does not arrive as revelation. It arrives almost politely, with the patience of weather, and begins to rearrange the furniture of the inner life. The people stay the same. The job stays the same. The walls of the house stay the same. But the inside of the seer no longer fits the scene. That question is older than any of those who have asked it. It has shape. It has a long history. It has, in fact, a name, though most who arrive at it think the name is theirs alone. Plato gave it a name 24 centuries ago, and the name is still working, which is rare for a philosopher's image. The cave. The cave reads as a story, but the story is the surface of it. Underneath, it is a diagram of a condition. A group of human beings are bound, from birth, inside an underground chamber. They face a single wall. They cannot turn their heads. Behind them, out of their sight, a fire is burning, and between the fire and their backs, others walk, carrying objects, carved figures of animals, of plants, of human shapes. The fire throws the shadows of these objects onto the wall in front of the prisoners. The prisoners watch the shadows their entire lives. They name them. They argue about which shadow comes next. They build whole sciences and whole moralities out of patterns in the moving shapes. And what else were they to do? The shadows are the only thing they have ever seen. Plato did not write this as a story about other people. He wrote it as a description of the reader. The cave is not a place out there, in some primitive history of the species. The cave is the entire field of what one has accepted without ever turning to look. The inherited stories, the definitions one never agreed to but lives inside. Success, failure, worth, normal, even sometimes love. These are shadows on a wall most have never tried to face away from. Here the structure becomes uncomfortable, because if the cave is not a place out there, then the door out is not a door out there either. It is an inner motion. And what holds most people inside is not chains, and not guards, and not even ignorance. What holds them is something far quieter and far more difficult to see. The familiar. The familiar feels like home. The familiar feels like safety. The familiar feels like the ground beneath one's life. And precisely because it feels that way, it does not present itself as a wall. It presents itself as the world. This is the paradox at the center of the allegory, and Plato chose the image with care. The prisoners are not in pain. They are not being whipped. They are not starving. The cave is not a torture chamber. The cave is comfortable enough. The shadows are interesting enough. There are even small honors among the prisoners. Distinctions for those who can predict which shadow comes next. Slow careers built around the wall, small disputes about the meaning of the figures. The cave is, by every emotional measure available to those inside it, home. And that is exactly why it is the cage. This is why so many lives end in the same shape they were given, with no scandal and no rebellion. Not because something went wrong, but because nothing ever felt wrong enough to investigate. The cave does not announce itself as captivity. It announces itself as the order of things. It speaks when it speaks at all, in the voice of common sense, of practicality, of what reasonable people accept. The wall does not need a guard if every prisoner is convinced that the wall is the world. A cage made of bars announces itself. One can see the bars. One can curse them, push against them, dream of being elsewhere. A cage made of familiarity does not announce itself. It announces only the world. The world, it says, is this. There is no elsewhere. There is no outside. There is only this wall and these shadows, and the slow, agreed-upon importance of distinguishing between them. Once that is seen, even once, even unsteadily, the phrase is no longer symbolic. The familiar has become the cage, not because anything has changed in the cave, because the cave has for the first time been recognized. There is a sentence written in the 19th century by Kierkegaard that lands here like cold water on the face. There are two ways to be deceived. The first is to believe what is not true. The second is to refuse to believe what is true. Most who hear this assume the first is the danger. The second is heavier because it cannot be argued with. A false belief can be corrected by showing the truth. A refusal of truth cannot be corrected at all because it is not a mistake of the intellect. It is a choice of the nerves. The cave is not, in the end, a place where lies are forced upon people. The cave is a place where truth, when it arrives, is politely refused, with reasonable sounding objections, with patient counter-arguments, with the small, steady weight of this is how things are. Fear is patient. It does not need to win arguments. It only needs to make the alternative feel unbearable. This is also the answer to a question many ask, without realizing they have asked it. Why does waking up hurt? If the truth is good, and the cave is illusion, why does the first taste of light feel like injury? Plato answers this with care, and the answer is one of the most honest passages in the whole of Western philosophy. In the parable, one prisoner is unchained, not by his own decision. The text says he is dragged. He is forced to stand, forced to turn, forced to look toward the fire. And the first sensation is not enlightenment. The first sensation is pain. His eyes burn. The fire is brighter than the shadows he has spent a lifetime studying. He is disoriented. He misses the wall. He misses the certainty of names and disputes. The cave was many things. It was also predictable. And the nervous system of any creature, including the human, is wired to prefer pain it knows over freedom it does not. This is why the threshold cannot be crossed quickly. Plato builds the progression deliberately. First, the freed prisoner can only bear to look at reflections of things in pools of water. Only later can he bear the objects directly. Only later, the sky. And only after long adjustment can he turn toward the sun, which is not, in Plato's writing, the thing in the daytime sky. The sun is the form of the good, the deepest reality behind reality, the source by which all visible things are visible at all. The journey is not then the learning of new information. The journey is the slow rebuilding of the eyes. Plato did not invent this discomfort by accident. He had been the student of Socrates, and Socrates had been condemned to death by the city of Athens for the same offense the freed prisoner commits in the parable. He had walked among his fellow citizens and asked questions that loosened the chains. What is justice? What is piety? What is the good? Asked patiently, asked without contempt, but asked until the confident answers showed themselves to be shadows. The city did not punish him for being wrong. The city refused to forgive him for disturbing the wall. The hemlock he drank was the cave's reply to the freed prisoner who had insisted on coming back. This is a pattern that runs through the long human story like a vein through stone. The one who turns first does not return to applause. There is an older version of the same figure in Greek myth. Prometheus, whose name means forethought. He stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity, not warmth, but knowledge, the spark that turns a creature from prey into maker. For this he was punished, not for the harm done to humans, but for altering the balance, for bringing a light into a darkness that had, until then, been settled. Read carefully, the freed prisoner of Plato and the chained titan of Hesiod are the same figure under two different names. The one who ascends, who sees, and who is then forced to bring something back into the country of the unseeing. The cave punishes the returnee in one way. The gods punish the giver in another. The city punishes the questioner in a third. The shape of the punishment changes. The shape of the offense does not. The familiar does not forgive intrusion. Joseph Campbell, in the last century, gave this pattern a single name. He called it the hero's journey, departure from the familiar, initiation through trial and revelation, return changed, carrying something the old world did not ask for. Most lives, on close inspection, contain a small version of it folded somewhere inside. A quiet return in which one is no longer entirely the person who left. Siddhartha Gautama leaves the palace, sees the outside of the wall for the first time, old age, sickness, death, and does not return to the palace. He returns instead to the world. The same architecture, enclosure, rupture, vision, return. The man who walks back out of the forest as the Buddha is the freed prisoner with a different vocabulary. The Matrix, 24 centuries after Plato, is the cave again, fluorescent, electrical, late 20th century, with the same architecture intact. A wall of agreed upon shadows, a small painful invitation to turn, a sun that hurts the eyes, a choice between the familiar and the seen. What unites these stories across millennia and across continents is not a moral. It is a recognition that what holds the human being most reliably is not iron. It is the comfort of the inherited room, and the threshold of every spiritual tradition the world has produced begins at the edge of that comfort. Plato seems to have known that a single allegory would not be enough to lift the wall in any reader's life. He did not write the cave as a closed argument. He wrote it as a door. The cave does not require belief. It requires only the small, uncomfortable willingness to look at one's own life as if it was something one had been watching, rather than something one had been living. Now comes the part of the parable that is rarely emphasized, though it is the longest section. The freed prisoner, after his eyes have adjusted to the light, returns to the cave. Plato is specific about why. He returns because he carries something the others need, and because the others, for all their illusions, are still kin. He goes back, and his eyes, now accustomed to the sun, can no longer see the shadows clearly. He stumbles. He misnames the figures. He fails at the only thing the prisoners consider competence. They watch him fail, and they draw the natural conclusion. Going up there ruined him. He has lost his sight. Whatever he claims he saw, look at him now. He cannot even read the wall properly. And in Plato's telling, if they could lay their hands on him, they would kill him for trying to set them free. This is not pessimism so much as observation. Most who attempt to describe what they have seen, on returning, are met with a particular kind of resistance, not argument, but the soft, immovable refusal of the familiar to admit anything that might unsettle it. The prisoners do not hate the freed one. They simply cannot afford to believe him without paying the price he paid. And so they turn away and call his light blindness, and go back to their disputes about the order of the shadows. In the long quiet between the parable and the present, a question begins to address the reader rather than the philosopher. What, in your own life, has been carrying the weight of a wall? The patterns that were never decided, only inherited. The relationships maintained by silence. The career chosen at 22 when 22 had no business choosing. The version of the self that was rewarded once, long ago, and has been performing ever since. None of these are evil. The cave is not made of evil. It is made of unexamined kindness, unexamined fear, unexamined repetition. It is built, in most lives, by people who love the seer enough to hand them a wall and call it a world. The harshness of recognizing this is not an accusation against them. It is the cost of seeing what was given before one had the language to refuse it. And the question is not whether the walls exist. The question is whether you have begun, even in some small and inconvenient way, to feel the thinness of them. Because that thinness, that quiet, almost embarrassed recognition that the world one has been living in is in fact a wall, is the first motion of the ascent. It is not a triumph. It does not feel like enlightenment. It feels like discomfort that will not go away. It feels like a question that has moved into the house and started rearranging the furniture. It feels often like loneliness, because the others, for now, are still watching the shadows. Yet the loneliness, on closer inspection, has a particular shape. It is the small distance that opens between someone who has begun to see and a world that has not yet noticed there is anything to see. It is the first room of an honest life. And honest rooms, in the beginning, are quiet. This is why the threshold is real. Once seen, the wall cannot be unseen. The world does not need to be left behind. It can still be lived in. The job can be kept. The people can still be loved. The same streets can still be walked. But the shadows can no longer be mistaken for the sun. Comfort can no longer be mistaken for the substance of truth. Something within will keep turning toward the fire, even when the eyes burn. Heraclitus, writing 2 centuries before Plato was born, left a single sentence that has survived where most of his work has not. The road up and the road down are one and the same. It is a strange line to read at the close of an allegory about ascent, but it is the truest line one can read at the close of this one. Because the road up, out of the cave, does not lead away from one's life. It leads back into it, only with eyes that have finally learned to see. The cave is not a thing to escape. It is a thing to recognize. And the wall, once recognized, does not need to be torn down. It needs to be named. Once it has been named, the familiar stops being shelter. The familiar becomes the cage. And from inside any cage, even one made of comfort, the smallest turning of the head, toward the fire, toward the door, toward whatever brightness one is afraid to look at directly, is already the first motion of being free.